Welcome to the Mountain Journals. I actually like the Royal Enfield range, and in particular I think they're quite an easy range to understand. They do various engines and then build variants around that engine. They make 350s in various formats, they make 411s in various formats, make 650s in various formats, and more recently they introduced this engine, the Sherpa engine, which is a 450 and their first liquid-cooled bike to the range. Their first entry was the Himalayan, which we covered a few months ago, and if you're one of the 35,000 people who've been kind enough to watch it, thank you. I was looking forward to trying this one, the Roadster, called the Guerrilla. Unusual name. So what I'll be doing today is going through the specifications of this particular version. We'll be going for a ride in the rain, and then we'll be coming back here and I'll be giving you my concluding first impressions of the bike. As always, I hope that you enjoy it. Right, so let's go through the specifications of the bike. I'm very conscious that for those of you kind enough to watch regularly, you'll say, well, you've already covered that. But of course, a number of people who watch these videos, they're actually only watching the one on the specific bike that they're interested in, which is why I like to go through on each occasion what the specification is. We'll start with the engine. Right, so starting with the engine, this is the 452, and although it's in what they call the K series, they call it the Sherpa engine, and it's actually the only one of the range that has got liquid cooling as they gradually progress in their development. Now, it's got double overhead cams in there, and again, unlike some of the earlier models, this has actually got shim adjustment for those that actually like to do their own maintenance on it. Relatively straightforward. I think most of us had a go at tappet adjustment and shims over the years. The bike produces, or the engine produces, 40 brake horsepower at 8,000 revs, which is the same as the Himalayan. It's got 40 newton meters of torque at 5,500, which again is the same. Now, this engine is technically what's known as over square, and that's a bit of an old-fashioned concept, but it's really when the bore's bigger than the stroke. So this is 84 millimeters bore and 81.5 millimeters of stroke, and that used to, in the old days, really determine how the power was delivered. But a combination of stroke, bore, and ECU is how they control power now, and that is quite a low down production of good torque, and I'll talk about that more when we go for a ride. The bike is fuel injected. Right, so going to the front of the bike, it's a 17-inch front wheel, and that's our 120/70 profile tyre. These forks are shower, and they're 43 millimeters, which is the same dimensions as the Himalayan, but this is not upside down, this is conventional. You can see under there, bit of moisture. When you see the video where I rode, you'll know why they got moisture in there. And indeed, if you see any marks on the bike where it's still dirty, you'll understand why. Work in progress, so to speak. I'll do that later. And these shower shocks are obviously significantly shorter than the Himalayan, which is designed as a dual-purpose bike, and as a result it's got significantly less travel. So this is 140 millimeters of travel rather than the 200 that we talked about when we reviewed the Himalayan. This is a single disc, and again slight differences on this to the other bike that we reviewed. This is 310 millimeter disc, and it's got a double piston. You can probably just see in there, it's got a double piston caliper in there. The Himalayan was 320, by the way. Now this, I got myself in a mess with when we did the Himalayan, because I talked about having tubeless tyres when actually looking at the valve of a tube. But this one, you can see very clearly, it is actually tubeless as well. In terms of other things that we sometimes talk when we're at the front end, we talk about rake, the angle coming down here, the difference between the upright and the angle of the forks, and that's a quite sharp 21.8. And when we get to overall dimensions, you'll see what impact that makes. And indeed, those two characteristics give me a clue as to how this bike should be handling. Let's have a look at the rear. Right, at the back here, it's got what appears to be a very similar unit to the Himalayan, although it is slightly different because it delivers a slightly different outcome. It's called a linkage type. It's a monotube shock, and again, it's a shower unit, and that delivers 150mm of travel as opposed to the 200 that was on the Himalayan, which is 200 at both ends. Very little adjustments on it, but you have got preload via the conventional C-spanner, and they do actually helpfully provide one of those under the seat. In terms of the back wheel and the brakes around here, it's a 17-inch wheel, and it's fitted with 160/60 profiles. And as I say, you can see, if I was to revolve that, might be able to see down there, tubeless. That's a 270mm disc. That's called an axial floating rear caliper, and like all the bikes, they are linked. So this little disc here, by the way, this sort of is how you get your ABS to activate. There's a little electromagnet, you might be able to see it, a little sensor, and that's reading the impulses as they get blanked off. So that's actually how ABS works, and as I say, it's a combined system, so as I sort of say in jest, they both panic together. In terms of the swing arm here, this is again similar. This is a twin-sided, steel fabricated swing arm. Quite a nice finish on this actually, although I tend to talk about finishes in a different section, but this is quite easy to clean. I quite like this sort of shiny look, and if we just go back and pan sort of this way, you can look. I'm not ever so keen on what I call this sort of textured finish on heat surfaces, because the dirt can cook itself into the recesses, but this one has, despite the fact I got it very dirty, it's come up reasonably well. And that was largely done through WD-40, which I use. And the WD, by the way, and some people occasionally ask me about these sort of things, what is it? Well, WD is a water dispellent. That's what the WD actually stands for. And again, when you see the video, you'll know why I used water dispersant on the engine for cleaning purposes. Okay, just while we're on this side of the bike, a couple of things I'd just like to point out. Over the years, the quality of the chains have improved on Royal Enfields, and this is it's an endless chain. I've actually just lubed it up, and occasionally, I say people ask me, I actually use that. Other brands are available. I don't get paid to endorse it or anything like that. Just people sometimes ask what I use, and I find it very useful. But after the wear it had been, it needed a good lube up, which I did. The other thing I'd bring to your attention is actually the gearbox on this bike. Unlike the previous Himalayan and the other 411, the Scram, these are 6-speed gearboxes on the 450 engine. So you can see, I'll say that relentless progression. Standing back, I always think it's a good way of getting a good feel of the dimensions. First thing that obviously strikes you, they have got some quite striking colours. There are 3 or 4 different permutations on it. In terms of, in the UK, the base bike is 4850 from memory, which is a single silver, I think. And you then get various options, but you can get the bike up through the specs from just £5,050, which I'll touch on a bit later, but it's not an expensive bike for what it is. The wheelbase, as you look at it, the best way to see a wheelbase is from the distance, i.e. wheel-to-wheel contact, if indeed the rear wheel was down, but that's 1440 millimetres, so it's quite a short wheelbase and it's quite a sharp rake. And those of you who watched the programme, these videos before, will know that I will be assuming from that this should be, in theory, quite nimble, quite quick steering. The tank is an 11-litre tank, and the Himalayan was 17, so quite a bit smaller capacity, and which will affect your range, but again, I'll clarify that when we go for a ride. But it also helps with weight. it is a lighter bike overall. It weighs 184 kilograms, while the Himalayan weighs 196 kilograms. If you think, well, 12 kilos doesn't sound much, just to translate that back into old money, that's £26. So if you were carrying that on your back, you definitely notice it. So it is a significantly lighter bike. One thing again to notice is the seat. That is a 780mm seat. So for the vertically challenged amongst us, it's a very easy seat height to ride. It's got these integrated indicators, so it's a brake, light and indicator, and that's quite a sort of a modern thing. You see it quite, my new BMW 1300 has got it. It's tidy and I like the look of it, and it's nice that it's integrated in that way. But interesting enough, when friends riding behind me on my 1300 said, yeah, but when you actually brake and turn your indicators on, you can't see it as clearly. So it's like most things, it's one step forward and then occasionally one step back. Right, let's have a look at the dash and the instrumentation. So just starting on the right hand instrument cluster, starting the bike is started by the red switch, just pulling it to the left, and then you've got modes. Now the mode button, if you press the button in, you've only got two modes. You've got performance ABS on, or I'll just press quickly, eco ABS on. If you recall, and you did watch the Himalayan one, that one you can disable the ABS, because turning off ABS is quite useful off-road. This is a roadster, not an off-roader. Now, so once you've sorted out what mode you actually want to be in, you've then got various other options. This is I think it's a nice, clear, straightforward 4-inch TFT. Interestingly, the base model actually comes with an older instrument cluster plus a small dial which does your sort of directional arrows. But this one is, and anything from base upwards, you get this instrument, and this has maps capability within it via your phone. You can do music, messages, various other things, and you have got down here a little phone, something we can charge your phone on with a little C connector. So it is got that modern capability of giving you additional information. As well as that sort of remote access via your phone, you've also got a number of controls on the bike which just tells you, as you'd normally expect, you can cursor through using the buttons over here and the home button on the top. You can just cursor through and you can get, obviously, trips. You've got 2 trips on it, engine temperature, voltage, and you can change the appearance. You can have it in this appearance, which is this is actually auto, so in dark conditions it will go one colour, but then it will switch to white, or you could just put it to black only, whatever your personal preferences are. But I think it's quite a nice little setup, and it is easy to read when you're out and about on the road. Practical, useful information. My original plan had been to go to the Forest of Dean, but the weather had a very different idea. With heavy rain and roads that were pretty flooded in places, I decided to keep on roads that I know. I always take the view that a water-filled pothole is still a pothole, and it's best if you know where at least some of them are. It was, as is often the case, a gentle start. Initially, when I'm riding a bike in rain, I do like to just get a feel for the tyres, because of course the tyres are doing two things. They're offering grip, but they also give you feel and feedback, and I won't suggest anything other than I wasn't trying the grip particularly aggressively today. In these sort of conditions, I'll just assume there isn't much, but I was quietly impressed by the initial feel. You do actually get some good feedback from the tyres, which isn't always the case with manufacturer fitted units, and for me that was a small tick in the box as I started the journey. I am, of course, familiar with the clutch, the engine and the gearbox on this bike, which is the same as fitted into the Himalayan, which I tested a couple of months ago. I've actually put the link for that test in the description box below if anybody would like to watch that. The clutch itself is actually quite slow, and the engagement point was quite a long way out on the lever. It is a slipper clutch, but as I demonstrate later, it is easier if you take your time in first and second and give it plenty of time to sort of catch up with one another. The bike, by the way, is very happy to pull away in second, so it gives you another option in that regard. I quickly settled into a sort of gentle potter around the lanes and local roads. As I expected from reading the specifications, the steering and handling of the bike is quicker than the new Himalayan, and it is a very nimble bike. I made my way into Lechlade, a town, hoping to catch a little bit of traffic, but there was no traffic, which suggested to me that most people had a look outside their windows and decided that they were going to stay in, so far more sensible than my approach. Lechlade, for those of you interested, is actually a small town on the edge of the Cotswolds in Gloucestershire on the River Thames. It's actually the highest point that the Thames is navigable as it makes its way to London. It's been occupied since the Neolithic age apparently, and includes Iron Age and Roman settlements. Nowadays it's really mostly about tourism and clearly river-based activities. But back to the bike. The bike is comfortable at 20 mile an hour in second and third, and at 30 mile an hour in third and fourth. Although we said in the technical specification it's over square, which is not normally synonymous with low revs torque, it does have a very good usable torque and flexible power delivery. I'm always amused when I watch these videos back when I get back from recording at how clear the vision is for the camera compared to what I actually see through my visor. But I will. The weather was significantly worse than it looks, and I'll just ask you to take my word for that. They were tricky conditions to ride in. Avoiding the forest was probably a good idea. RAF Fairford is actually nearby. It's called RAF, but it's actually no longer an RAF station as such, as it hosts American Air Force personnel, and they actually fly their Lockheed U-2 from there, and it supports their bomber task force when it's doing operations in Europe, the B-52s. We actually quite often see them up in the skies around us. The fact that they can land and take off B-52s from there just tells you how long the airfield is, because you do need quite a run at it. And for those of you who are interested in your aircraft, the early Concorde test flights took place here. Going back to bike stuff, I do actually reflect quite often when I'm riding. I find it very relaxing, even in conditions like these. And I ride nowadays that I'm a man of leisure between 15 and 20,000 miles a year. Interestingly, I thought that as a result of doing that sort of mileage, I may end up riding faster. And whilst I definitely ride better through that experience, I'm not sure that faster would describe it. I've had significant experience, of course, and it's hard not to come to the conclusion that there is a significant percentage of people who drive cars who are at least visually challenged or just plain daft. Therefore, you won't be surprised here, I'm actually a bit more cautious when I ride and do like to see round the corner before I commit. But I do, as I've just said really, I do enjoy riding in conditions like this, although filming in them can be a little bit tricky with water ingress. The roads actually got worse before eventually, and for a short time only, getting better. With less debris on the roads, the bike goes well and it's easy to ride on the torque. The riding position is comfortable, and when you stop at junctions or at traffic lights, you have good foot contact on either side, which is great for riders of my, well, I was going to say height, but it's more about leg length. 29 and a bit inches is my inside leg measurement, and that is what determines your contact to ground, of course. I suspect the bike is actually a little bit petite for taller riders who may be better suited off with something like the 411 Scram, or indeed if they want the 450 engine, the new Himalayan. I did actually have a look to see if they had a taller seat option, but whilst they do have two seat options, I'm not convinced that they're going to give you any more significant height. The mirrors on the bike are good, and you get good vision from them. They do get a little blurry as you push on a bit and go higher up the revs in higher gears, which for obvious reasons I haven't filmed. But what I would say with that is anybody who's ridden any single cylinder bike knows that the more revs you give it, the more vibrations you get. It is indeed a characteristic of the engine. But for what it was, I think it's perfectly acceptable. On the previous test, strolling through the information fields by cursoring on the left-hand switchgear was slightly awkward. I found it a bit difficult to get my thumb in there and toggle downwards. With thicker gloves, I thought it's probably going to be a bit tricky today and maybe unusable, but it was actually okay. And for me, there's a little lesson there to be learnt, and it's all about the joys of getting used to bikes. YouTubers, I probably ride more miles on the bikes than most journalists or YouTubers get the opportunity to do, because I borrow them for a few days. But even still, you don't get that same familiarity that you get from riding a bike more regularly. With my own bikes, I like to actually do first impressions and then come back to it either 1,000 miles or sometimes even 2,000 miles later and say what I've learnt. And I don't think you should bear that in mind when you go out for your test ride on a bike. There are certain things that you may appear to annoy you initially, but you will actually get used to them, and other things which you haven't even noticed may irritate you slightly. So that's the joys of buying a bike or using a bike for a short period of time. Like most things that we use, you get used to them. One thing I really liked about the Himalayan when I tried it was its back lane handling. I was very keen to find out if this Guerrilla was as good. So I actually deliberately chose to use the same lane, although slightly different conditions, and there was gravel and mud strewn all over the places, and the edges that were damaged were obscured by water. I was, however, very impressed. It's precise, accurate, and it was comfortably absorbing the bumps, ruts, damage securely and safely. I did say on my previous video when I was using this lane that the only thing that sort of restricts you on this particular lane is not the bike, it was the traffic. And I felt the same about this bike. It's a big plus for me. On open roads, smaller CC bikes can be at a disadvantage. For me to really enjoy them, they need to have compensating factors, and one of them is the ability to ride well along the back lanes. This one certainly does. Recaffeinated, slightly warmer, and with the rain, well, easing if not stopping, I thought it was time to ride a road I know reasonably well. I rode it sensibly. This bike is perfectly capable of riding this road at significantly higher speeds than these, but blurring speeds is increasingly tedious, and as floods were a real threat, I was sensible. The suspension is plush, and I'm actually confident that this bike will be good fun on a dry day in a 450, 40 horsepower sort of way. This is, of course, an urban roadster. It's a bike designed for use in town, including the sort of dual carriageways and larger roads that link them, and as well as a bit of weekend fun. So my next logical stop was a carriageway. I thought the ramp would give me a good opportunity to demonstrate acceleration. I normally edit out most of my riding errors, but I left this one in as it demonstrates what I meant about the clutch in first and second. I was just treating it like some of my other significantly more expensive and sporty bikes. Just open the throttle, feather the clutch and off you go. This clutch engine combination does need a bit more finesse than that, particularly in first and second, than I normally bother with. It's not a problem, and better riding, as I proved to myself later, will solve it, but it is a good demonstration of the characteristics of the bike. Once in third, the bike accelerates nicely and higher gear change are easy. The bike is significantly faster than the 411 engined versions, and most journalists, and I agree with them, perceive this as a 100 mile per hour on the clock bike. It's got useful mid-range performance. For me, riding on a dual carriageway, I like to know if I'm doing 70 miles an hour, which is the national speed limit, do I have two options? Can I stop quickly and efficiently, and can I accelerate away if that's my preferred choice? And the answer is yes to both. This is not a sophisticated bike. There's got no cruise control, there's no heated grips, although you can obviously get those aftermarket. It's got no lean sensitive ABS. It's actually a refreshingly straightforward sort of bike. Could you tour on it? Well, probably, although you can get panniers, soft panniers for it, and rails which attach comfortably to the back, and a rear rack. I think if you're planning any longer sort of journeys, world tours, or indeed just wanting to look like you're going on a world tour, the Himalayan would probably be the better choice. The bike does have a smaller tank. It's got 11 litres versus 17, and that clearly reduces range, but it also reduces weight, which is an advantage for some and no doubt contributes towards its nimble feel. Not entirely convinced on the accuracy of the range and miles per gallon indicators, because it was sort of constantly calculating and coming up with different views, but again that might be something I'd get used to if I was living with the bike for longer. But my fuel stops suggest that I was getting about 80 miles to the gallon. I'm sure some would get more and some would get less, depending on your own individual riding style. Reflecting as I made my way back, I was actually more impressed with this Guerrilla than I thought I was going to be. Subconsciously, I think I'd sort of already decided that the Himalayan was a good bike, and what was this one about? But the backlane capability of this Guerrilla won me over. It is fun, it's nimble, it's lighter than the Himalayan, and it's agile. Now, of course, if you're tempted to go off-road or do some serious long tour exploring, the Himalayan is the better bet. But riding through town, weekend runs, this £5,000 bike, some are slightly less and some are slightly more, is £1,500 less in the UK than the cheapest Himalayan. And it does have a lot of virtues. It is also clearly styled for a more modern, younger market than the traditionalists the brand has historically attracted, and personally, I think it's a good thing that they can have a foot in both camps. I had actually planned to head into Oxford to prove what I'd already personally established, in as much as this is a precise handling small bike that is a doddle to ride easily in tight spaces and at slow speeds. But rain definitely stopped play. I can now verify that the new Guerrilla copes with 2 foot of water far better than my boots. I clearly enjoyed it despite the weather. I think it's a good little bike. Now, this sector is quite busy. There's quite a number of bikes around this sort of 40 brake horsepower, which in the UK is based on legislation. And if I was in the market for one of these, what I would do is personally, I'd go and try the Triumph 400, which has been very well received. A little bit more money than this. I'd possibly try the KTM 390, which is, if you pay list price, is quite a lot more money than this, and is a bit more of a dynamic sporty bike. Although this, as I've sort of touched on, does ride well. It's fun, it's nimble, easy to ride with a low seat height, and it's got what power it has and what torque it has at a very accessible part of the rev range, which makes it very rideable in traffic, which indeed what this is designed to be. It's an urban roadster. Other bikes you could of course consider are bikes from the numerous Chinese manufacturers that are now entering the market, and they have improved their quality, but I still think, certainly of the ones that I've seen, this represents good value for money, and the quality is at a good level for the price that you pay. My thanks as always to King's Two Wheel Centre for lending me the bike. You can't make videos without access to bikes, and I do really appreciate it. I hope that you've enjoyed it, and if you did, you might consider pressing like or even consider subscribing to the channel. But as is always, what's most important is that you ride safe and you stay well. You may want to keep a little bit drier than I did though.